In early spring of 2024, a young couple from Savannah, Georgia Daniel and Claire Hargrove purchased a historic estate in the hills of Calabasas, California. The listing didn't mention its previous owner, but Daniel, an independent music producer, quickly recognized the Mediterranean Revival mansion as the former home of Lisa Marie Presley, daughter of Elvis Presley. Lisa had lived in the house sporadically over the years before her sudden passing in January 2023. The price had been slashed several times. The real estate agent brushed it off as market conditions. But when Claire asked if anyone had died in the house, the agent hesitated before saying, "Not exactly." The implication lingered in the air like a cold draft. The house was beautiful arched doorways, Spanish tile floors, ornate fireplaces, and a sunroom that caught every golden drop of the late afternoon light. Claire fell in love with it immediately. There was a wistful sadness to the place, like the house was holding its breath. They moved in on a Thursday. The first few days were peaceful, even euphoric. Claire spent her time in the garden, while Daniel converted a side room into a recording studio. But then odd things began to happen. Started small. A floorboard would creak in the hallway when no one was walking. The fireplace in the living room would emit a faint, sweet smell like burnt roses. The door to the sunroom would swing open at odd hours, despite the latches being locked. Claire heard music at night, always just out of clarity. It was never the same song, but it always sounded like an old recording, warm, analog, almost like it was playing from a vinyl record on the floor above them. But the house had no attic. Daniel brushed it off as atmosphere, blaming the house's age. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She started sleeping with the hallway light on. One morning, she found the phrase, "I wasn't finished," written in condensation on the bathroom mirror. She hadn't taken a shower. Daniel hadn't used the bathroom that morning. There was no explanation. Claire began researching the house more deeply. She uncovered that Lisa Marie had bought the property in the early 2010s after her divorce from Michael Lockwood. It was meant to be a fresh start. She had lived there off and on, sometimes alone, sometimes with her children. Friends described the home as her retreat, but also mentioned that she often felt uneasy in it. Lisa once confided to someone that she thought the house had a pulse of its own. Claire reached out to a neighbor, an older woman named Yvonne who had lived on the street for decades. Yvonne spoke slowly, choosing her words like they had weight. She was a gentle soul, Lisa. Troubled, yes, but gentle. She used to sit in that sunroom every evening, with a glass of wine and a notebook, writing lyrics, letters. I think she was trying to talk to someone who was already gone. Claire asked if anything strange had happened after Lisa died. Yvonne's voice dropped. No one stayed in that house long. First it was rented, then empty. The last tenant left without notice. Said he couldn't sleep, kept dreaming of a woman crying by the fireplace. Daniel's skepticism faded when the recordings began to change. He'd recorded a singer late one night, playing back a clean track of vocals through his monitors. But when he listened to it the next morning, there was a second voice underneath it, soft, melodic, and distinctly female. "Did you add harmonies?" he asked the singer, who shook her head. He isolated the track. The ghostly voice was singing a few bars of a song Daniel didn't recognize, but it felt heartbreakingly intimate, like someone whispering a secret through tears. Daniel became obsessed with the recording. He tried to find its origin, even ran spectral analysis on it. The voice appeared and disappeared at random, always just below the surface, as if the house itself was trying to be heard. Meanwhile, Claire saw her again. It happened in the sunroom, just after dusk. The shadows had begun to settle in the corners of the room. Claire looked up from her book and saw a woman standing outside the window. She was barefoot, wearing a pale, flowing dress. Her face was in shadow, but her presence was unmistakable. Claire didn't scream. She simply whispered, "Lisa," and the woman vanished. On a rainy Saturday, while cleaning the fireplace for the first time since they moved in, Claire discovered a bundle of papers wedged behind a loose brick. Most were fragments, pages of lyrics, torn notes, even a scribbled message to someone named Ben. Among them was a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To whoever lives here next." Inside was a single page. Handwritten. Shaky. I know I won't finish what I began in this house. It's taken too much from me. But if you feel me, if you hear my music, know that I only ever wanted peace. I didn't mean to stay. I just don't know how to go. It was signed. LMP. They didn't call a priest. Or a medium. Or a ghost hunter. They simply framed the letter and hung it above the fireplace. And from that moment, things changed. The strange sounds didn't stop, but they softened. The music still played, but it was quieter, gentler. Claire continued to see Lisa from time to time, usually in the sunroom, always at twilight. Daniel even sampled her voice in a song once, weaving it in as a background harmony. The track went viral online, though no one could quite place why it felt so haunting. The house never gave them peace, but it gave them something else, a constant presence. A reminder that some souls don't haunt out of anger but out of love, unfinished dreams, and the hope that someone will finally listen. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. By late summer, the days grew longer, hotter, and almost too quiet. The kind of heat that made everything slow down. Insects chirped lazily. The hills around Calabasas stood dry and golden like something sacred and forgotten. The Hargroves had been in the house just over 5 months. It no longer felt like they were guests, but neither did it feel entirely like theirs. The walls still creaked in the same rhythmic places after dark. The second-floor bathroom still emitted the scent of roses when no water had run for hours. And Daniel's studio? It had become something else altogether. It was no longer just a place where he worked. It was where she responded. It always started the same way. He'd play back a clean mix, just vocals and guitar, and somewhere deep within the ambient track, there'd be a faint sound, like breathing or wind brushing silk. At first, he tried to ignore it, chalked it up to bad cabling or environmental noise. But then came the dissonant piano chord, sharp and distant in a track that used no piano. Then the harmonies, always delicate, always perfectly in key. Daniel had begun keeping a separate folder on his computer titled LMP Fragments. It held dozens of these anomalies. Snippets of spectral melodies, tiny flourishes in the background, breaths, humming, what almost sounded like phrases whispered through static. One night, Claire caught him listening to a looped segment, leaning in close to the monitor, face pale and rigid. He clicked pause, looked at her like he'd just woken up. "She said my name," he whispered. "Claire, it's my name. Listen." He played it back. And yes, just faintly under a harmony line, you could hear a woman's voice, broken and raspy, say Daniel. Not once, but twice. Claire didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She simply walked to the window. The glass reflected the soft orange glow of the hallway light, and in the reflection, for just a moment, she saw 3 figures. Her, Daniel, and a third shape, feminine, thin, blurred like a smudge of moonlight. Standing just behind him, she turned quickly. Nothing was there. There was one part of the house they didn't use. It was upstairs, a small, narrow space off the hallway, past the master bedroom. The previous owners had converted it into a storage closet, but the original blueprints listed it as a writing room. It had a window overlooking the hills, a small arched ceiling, and a single antique chair left behind when the house was sold. Claire called it the Red Room, not because it was red, it wasn't, but because she always dreamed it was. And in her dreams, it bled light. There was always something about that room. The door never stayed closed. They tried everything, fixing the latch, replacing the hinges, even installing a magnetic strip. Still, at night, they'd wake to find it wide open. One evening, Claire left a small recorder inside, half on a dare. She shut the door and placed her palm against it for a moment, just to feel the temperature of the wood. It was colder than the rest of the hallway. When she played back the recording the next morning, the audio was silent for the first 20 minutes. Then a sound like paper being handled, the rustling of fabric, faint exhale. Then came the voice, clearer than anything they'd captured before. "I couldn't stop it. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave them." It was unmistakably Lisa's voice. Claire had watched enough interviews. There was a tremble to it, a grain of sorrow so authentic that her entire chest clenched. She didn't let Daniel hear this one. She just kept it. But the red room began to change after that. The air inside grew heavier. The faint smell of sandalwood drifted in, even though they hadn't burned incense. The chair, the old one, began to appear in different positions. Once it faced the window. Then it was turned toward the door. Then, one morning, it was in the hallway entirely, blocking the entrance to their bedroom. They didn't move it. They just stepped around it. Something in Claire had shifted. She began writing. Not emails. Not texts. She started keeping a journal, then pages of lyrics, though she wasn't a musician, poured out of her, like something was channeling through. Often the lines made no sense. They've closed the gate again. I can still see Memphis. I remember the garden. I remember the garden. Daniel once found her sitting in the sunroom with 3 candles lit, eyes glazed, humming a tune neither of them recognized. By October, the weather began to cool. The dry air that once lingered over the hills gave way to sudden fog, and the property, which once felt golden and exposed, now seemed wrapped in layers of silence. Even the birds outside were less active. Nights came faster. That's when Daniel started sleepwalking. Claire would wake around 3 a.m. and find him standing at the foot of the bed, staring at the open doorway. Or worse, gone entirely. One night, she followed him. He moved slowly, with the exaggerated stillness of someone underwater. He drifted down the stairs and into the sunroom. She didn't call his name, just watched. He stood there for nearly 10 minutes. Then he spoke, quietly, not to her. They didn't understand you, but I do. Another pause. I'm not afraid of you. Then he looked directly at Claire. But his eyes didn't seem to see her. His voice was deeper now, distant. She's watching. Claire stepped forward, touched his arm. He collapsed, eyes rolled back, and then he began to weep. Claire began waking up before dawn. She never set an alarm. It was her body that stirred first, then the strange, persistent feeling of being summoned. The air in the bedroom would be still, cool against her bare arms, and Daniel's body beside her, heavy and immobile in sleep. But something, a subtle sound, or a shift in pressure would pull her upright. It felt like music vibrating through the walls, but so faint it might as well have been memory. Each morning she followed it, barefoot, silent, down the stairs and out through the glass doors that led to the backyard garden. The property sloped downward into a shaded courtyard of crumbling stone, rose bushes, and fig trees overgrown, wild, neglected. The garden had been Lisa's favorite part of the house, according to one archived interview Claire had found buried online. It's where I feel closest to my father, Lisa had said. There's a quiet there. It's not peace exactly, but it's honest. Claire always stopped at the same place. A crooked bench of rusted wrought iron, half sunken into the earth beneath an old olive tree. The leaves above rattled in the wind like dry bones, but the tree itself never lost color. And always, beneath the bench, there would be something. Not left there, not the day before, not the week before. Claire was certain. But there it was, as though placed overnight with quiet deliberateness. A single page from a notebook, warped with age, torn along the edge, each with handwriting that matched the fragments she had once found behind the fireplace. One morning, the page simply said, "They think it ends when the body does, but it doesn't." Another time, I kept waiting for them to call me back, but the phone never rang. Some were just lyrics, raw, unfinished lines with deep emotional veins running through them. I left the stage before the encore, but the lights never dimmed, and I keep standing in the wings, waiting to be let in. Claire began collecting the pages, storing them carefully in an old wooden box she found in the attic. She never showed them to Daniel. Not at first. Not yet. There was something intimate in the act, like she was being trusted, confided in. She no longer feared the presence. Not the way Daniel did. His skepticism had hardened into dread. Hers into reverence. It was Daniel who saw him first. A tall, thin silhouette male standing at the far end of the hallway outside their bedroom. It was around 2 a.m., and Daniel had woken to use the bathroom. No dreams, no sounds, just an ordinary stirring. But the hallway was not empty. The man didn't move. He was backlit faintly by the light from the staircase below. His arms hung straight at his sides, rigid. Daniel thought it might be a trick of the eyes, a shadow cast by the coat rack until the figure tilted its head ever so slightly. Not like a person curious, but like someone listening. Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He stood there, heart thundering in his ears, until the figure finally stepped backward, not forward, into a darkened guest room. Silently, smoothly, gone. He didn't follow. He simply returned to bed and lay beside Claire, staring at the ceiling until morning broke. He didn't speak about it for days. Not until Claire asked him if he believed Lisa was the only one lingering in the house. He shook his head. "No," he whispered. "There's someone else. Someone who doesn't want to be seen." Daniel no longer trusted the studio. At night, the power flickered. Not a full blackout, just the subtle dimming of everything, as if the house were breathing in. The monitors hissed occasionally when powered off. And more than once, Daniel swore he saw the waveform of an audio track begin to move, animate, as though sound were being etched into it without a source. He tried to ignore it. He really did. But then the voice came through during a live session while the mics were hot and the singer was mid-verse. A second voice, distinctly female, but far more textured, older, with depth and ache. She sang with the vocalist, harmonizing just slightly off rhythm. The track was ruined. The singer screamed, packed up, never came back. When Daniel played the raw files again, the ghost voice was gone, replaced by silence. Not digital silence, absolute silence. A dead pocket of time that felt like it absorbed everything around it. He stopped using the studio after that. But the music didn't stop. Late at night, he heard it drifting through the walls. Melodies without instruments. Voices without lungs. A piano that hadn't been played in a decade began to echo through the floors. Even though there was no piano in the house, Claire began to hum in her sleep. It was during one of those glowing twilight hours that Claire stood in the sunroom again, the place where the haunting always felt closest, and she saw her. Not a glimpse, not a shadow. A full-bodied figure, standing just beyond the glass pane of the window that faced the garden. The woman wore pale linen. Her arms crossed delicately over her chest. Her face was serene but fixed, like someone on the verge of remembering something terrible. It was Lisa, or what remained of her. But there was something different now. Claire couldn't say how she knew it, but in that moment, it felt like Lisa wasn't just visiting anymore. She was being held. By the house, or by something inside it. She felt the cold radiating from the glass. A deep, aching grief soaked into the foundations of the home, as if the walls weren't haunted by one spirit, but by generations of silence, sadness, and longing all woven together like vines through a lattice. Lisa raised her hand and pressed her palm against the window. Claire mirrored her instinctively. Their palms aligned, only the glass between them. And that's when Claire finally heard the words. Not from Lisa's mouth, but inside her own head, perfectly clear. "He didn't leave." And then she vanished. It ended in winter. Not with an exorcism. Not with screaming or blood or a dramatic climax in the Hollywood sense. It ended the way real hauntings do, slowly, like fog lifting, leaving behind dew and silence and the unsettling sense that you've missed something important. By December, Claire had become different. She still moved through the house like herself, made tea in the mornings, tended the garden in long sweaters and muddy slippers, lit candles at dusk. But Daniel noticed the small shifts. She laughed less, stared longer at empty spaces, began writing letters she never mailed, and singing songs she claimed she didn't remember the words to. Sometimes, he'd find her on the old iron bench before sunrise, speaking in low tones to no one. And yet the house was calmer. The humming stopped. The lights no longer flickered. The scent of roses faded, replaced by dust and cedarwood. The red room door remained shut for weeks. And Daniel? He became quieter too. He spent his days cleaning the studio, not working. Sitting at the desk, fingers hovering above the keyboard, as if expecting someone else to press the keys. At night he dreamed of corridors long, Endless hallways lined with photographs that changed as he passed them. Sometimes the photos blinked. In one dream, he opened a door and found Lisa sitting at the piano, her back to him. She didn't turn around. She simply played a low, steady chord, her right hand trembling, and whispered, "I left everything in the song. You just have to listen all the way through." The next morning, Daniel pulled up the last unmixed session file. The one he had buried under backups. The one with the voice that had scared the singer out of the house. This time it was clean. The vocals aligned. No static, no dissonance. Just melody. He leaned in, let the whole track play. Near the end, just before the fade-out, came a single line. A whisper, nested so deeply in the reverb trail that you'd never notice it unless you were waiting for it. "Don't close the door. I'm still here." They stayed one more month. Then, one foggy morning, they packed up the house without speaking. No fight, no final decision, just a quiet mutual knowing. Claire left the old wooden box with the handwritten pages on the iron bench under the olive tree. Daniel sealed the studio door with a soft click and left the key on the windowsill. They drove down the winding hills of Calabasas in silence, the house growing smaller behind them, nestled among the gold and green like a wound finally healing over. They never sold it. They didn't rent it out. They simply left it alone. Let the vines creep back over the walkway. Let the walls breathe again. Let the voices, if they needed to, finish their songs in peace. And somewhere in that quiet house, beyond the red door and the garden gate, Lisa stayed. Not lost, not angry, just there. Waiting, perhaps, for someone else to listen all the way through. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.